hear you, Josh. I think you're gonna have to abandon the headphone.
Rest in peace.
All right, I'm just watching tonight, so cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Good luck, Dai.
Yes.
Ready?
Wow. You guys hear
Hi,
me?
Melanie.
Oh.
Hello.
Hey
Yeah.
guys.
Better.
Okay.
How's everyone doing? Oh, you're so pleasantly in 9 perfect squares. I love it when that happens. The Brady Bunch. I know.
The background.
I can look down and over.
The small joys of Zoom, Melanie.
I'll give up on trying to have a background. I can just do this and be like, hello.
Yes.
Yeah, I give up on having a background.
It's
Like,
okay.
No, it's good.
I'd be like, hello, I am the rainbow person. I will be giving. I can be really meta and be like background of myself as a background.
Can I ask the
Wow.
question if no one else has asked? Shirley, have you asked people, have they had their dinner?
Oh, I asked them like 3 times already. Of course. I was the second person in, and Ekshans was the only person there. I was like, so, dinner? I have had dinner. I actually overate, so I'm in a slight food coma right now, but it was very good. I discovered my favorite neighborhood soba restaurant delivered, and they took orders over Instagram, so I gave them a call, and they came to me. It was amazing.
Wow.
Wait, are you in New York? What restaurant is it?
New York, yeah.
Nice. Misha's here. I'm gonna let her in.
Okay.
Misha?
Misha.
Hello, Dr.
Hi,
Misha.
Misha. How are you? Oh, we need to unmute you.
Oh,
Oh, wait.
No, she's chewing. They're chewing.
Hi.
I'm also yes, I'm just squeezing in some lunch before this thing. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
I got my own snacks here, so.
Look at that California background you have there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Make her feet also a host.
Are you in a different times? Which are you West Coast?
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for inviting me. This is a great. It's cool.
So we're so excited to have you. It's great. I don't know if you remember, we met at Indiecade last year, I think.
No, we met somewhere else.
Did we meet somewhere else?
Yeah, I wasn't at Indiecade last year. I think we met in New York at the Refiguring the Future.
Oh, okay, yeah, that might be it.
Yeah.
For sure. It's so good to see you.
You too.
Are you eating dinner?
I'm eating lunch.
Nice.
Yeah.
mood. All my meals have blended together, so I don't know what meal is what anymore.
Yeah.
Like I'll eat like 2, and then I'll eat at like 4, and then I'll eat at 8, and then I'll eat at 12. And then I wake up and I eat whatever time it's then. As long as we're eating, it's all good.
Misha, Dahi is our host this
Yes.
evening, so we'll be making sure that everybody's introduced and all that good stuff. And
Awesome.
all you really need to do is listen to the presentations and then come in at the end and ask some good questions.
Awesome. I can do that. I already looked at the project, so thanks for sending me the website and stuff.
Great.
Thank you for looking.
Yeah. Now I feel silly eating. I'm gonna turn this video off.
No, it's okay. We were just discussing whether or not we ate dinner earlier, and I was talking about an awesome soba restaurant.
Oh my God. That is the one thing I don't have out here in the country is restaurants.
Yes, that's fair. But I'm sure your cooking's phenomenal, or if it's not, it's gotten phenomenal. So
I just made some pickled jalapenos and carrots for a little
that sounds
taco
good.
fun. We'll see how that goes.
Nice. I had actually just made some potato gnocchi today with brown butter sauce. And this is like, get out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when I say I overate, I ate this, some roasted cauliflowers, and ordered soba on top of that. So I'm currently in a really, really bad food coma.
I have never made gnocchi before.
This is hard.
This is on my cooking bucket list. So, I'm inspired now.
Me
I
too.
can see the recipe, Melanie.
So potato gnocchi. Wow, those are
Send it to all of us.
serious.
Yes.
Please.
Okay.
Did you like the way it came out? You must have.
It was actually very good. I was pleasantly surprised. I followed a different recipe for the sauce because I didn't like the sauce that he had. It was just brown butter with some shallots and some peas. I'm actually going to send it in chat for everyone so that you can.
Wow, that sounds.
I really
so
want to
good.
learn to make gnocchi. It's one of those things that I always look at it and I'm like, oh, this should be gluten-free, but it's not. And it make gluten-free.
I actually have
Yeah.
a gluten sensitivity, so I take a gluten pill.
Oh,
Fortunately, gnocchi is majority potato, and there's very little flour in it, like 100 grams per 500 grams of potato. So
wait, do gluten pills work?
they work. They work for me. I think it depends on
Oh.
how sensitive you are to gluten. If you have celiacs, it does not work. But if mild sensitivity, they're pretty good.
Ian's here. He says he's stuck in the waiting room.
All right.
There's 10 people in the waiting room.
Are we letting?
Yeah, we haven't let students in yet, but we can. It's 5:56. I don't see why not.
Hello, Ian.
Hey, Ian.
Hello.
Right.
Yeah, we can let them in then.
I just got the URL for the awesome looking soba restaurant.
Oh my god.
Oh, sorry.
But I'm psyched to get that too.
Yes. Okay, wait. I will find it. Where did I send it?
Hello, Lionel.
Found it.
Hi, everybody.
It's okay.
There we
I'm
go.
not seeing everyone like flood in right now. Actually, it's a good thing everyone's here right now. Oh my god, at the BFA graduation yesterday, Jamie was driving and I called her out and she turned her camera off.
What? Are you kidding me? During graduation?
She's moving and so like
Pretty funny.
turn the camera off and I was like, Jamie, drive safe. And then they like turned the camera off. I was like, didn't want to get called out, I see. All right.
Oh my gosh.
Graduation was so chaotic yesterday. It was fun though. Oh my god, when Daniel Schiffman came, I started crying. I actually started crying. I had to turn my camera off because I was embarrassed. I started crying. I was like, is that Daniel Schiffman? And I started like
Schiffman came to your graduation?
he sent a pre-recorded video for the BFA class and I was
No.
crying.
What about us?
I know.
Like,
You didn't get Daniel Schiffman. You just
No.
got us.
Justin was like, we have this other person, like we didn't plan, like we didn't tell you guys, and I was like, hello, Daniel Schiffman, I have my train whistle, and I was like freaking out. Literally, if I hadn't had Daniel Schiffman and Coding Train, I would have like failed both Code 1 and Code 2 like instantly. Like literally saved my project. Absolutely phenomenal. It was so exciting.
He got
Daniel Schiffman to the last night of our live stream. I am your host, Dahi Lee, a BFA student, and I will be student moderating for tonight and will be streamlining this process. Tonight is our last night of the Hindsight 2020 Virtual Festival, and tonight's section is Immersive Narratives. And we have a really awesome lineup with 13 student presenters from both the MFA and the BFA program. We also have guest moderators, Dr. Micha Cardenas joining for the first section and Nicole He joining for the second. And the first part of the live stream is going to be from like 6 to 7:15-ish and followed by the Q&A. And then we're going to have a 5-minute break. And then the second part of the live stream is going to be from 7:15 to 8:20 followed by the last Q&A. And then we're going to be closing this virtual live stream festival with some words from John Sharp and Jess Irish. And just before we begin, some like housekeeping, I just want to remind everyone to please be on mute and have your video feed turned off if you are not speaking. So with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Ian, who is a BFA student.
Hey everyone. Let me just get to this section. Oh, my bad. Sorry, a little technical difficulties. Can everybody see it? Cool. So the project that I have created is entitled Divine Madness. A little backstory or a little information about me before I begin. My name is Ian Henderson. I'm an artist from Taos, New Mexico. Studied artistic anatomy, which is drawing the human form and creatures for about 9 years, which then propelled me into the game track at Parsons and interested in VFX. If you're interested to see more of my work, please check out my website. Anyway, the thesis project that I've created serves as an ongoing exploration into what makes an environment cohesive while giving the impression of a narrative. The project itself is in the form of a medieval library asset package, utilizing custom 3D models, textures, thus allowing for other artists to create their own variation of the medieval theme using the assets that I've created. A little backstory into the title itself, going off of Plato's Phaedrus, he uses the term divine madness to describe indescribable emotional passions such as beauty, love, wisdom. Thus, I came up with the title Divine Madness in reference to desire or pursuit for knowledge. And the backstory for this whole project is that scholars would come to the library in order to gain a sense of knowledge and elevate their faculties of mind. Unfortunately, as they continue to delve into the reaches of the library, they start to go mad themselves. In order to begin this process of creating the asset package, I first had to go into looking at how asset packages are created, and the main theme that was consistent in all asset packages that I found on YouTube, as well as other from other artists, was that all the asset packages have to be cohesive. Basically, same style, same general theme, so they all create essentially a narrative. Although the assets themselves don't really have a sense of personality. It's more once everything's grouped together that they form a story that's basically implicit. And then I'm going into the prototyping. I started out creating a whole bunch of textures, different objects, kind of messing around and getting a feel for how to make an environment and what story to tell in an environment. And some things that I had to keep in mind were that basically the asset package themselves, basically they all have to have a central theme. Since I'm sticking with the medieval theme, I was trying to incorporate various arches and very stone-like structures. Main component of asset packages is that they are modular. The different objects within the asset package itself are designed in order to be moved around and not deform when you're moving around. Therefore, the mesh itself, although the mesh of the object itself, although it doesn't seem super complex, is actually very, very important so that everything looks okay, especially for cinematics or other game assets or games such as Call of Duty. Going into more of my asset, this is just a brief scope of the different assets that I had to create and the different prototyping steps that I had to go through to create the final scene. And for the final reveal, these are the final results. A full library asset with different characters. The blue people in the scene themselves are reference heights for people so that I can give a sense of where people are in relation to the rest of the environment. And keeping in mind, everything is kind of going towards a medieval theme, while at the same time allowing for some artistic expression, such as the columns, and trying to make everything as cohesive to give the general impression of a library. And thus that ends the exploration of basically that the asset themselves is not as important as the collective whole. The combination of all of them create the final piece. I hope you enjoyed my project, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for that awesome presentation, Ian. Our next presenter will be Ji Hao, an MFA student. Ji Hao, an MFA student.
Hello everyone, my name is Ji Hao. I'm a creative tech designer and engineer, graduated from Parsons MFA Design Technology. Please check out my works on my website. So for my thesis, I built an agent-based simulation of interfacing machines with autonomous behavior. It is basically a game that people can play with this automaton and build stuffs. But not only the players, the automaton also have the abilities as we do. So here is a little demo of how people interact with this automaton and activate them. And these interfaces can also assemble themselves. So why I started this project? Back in 1991, computer scientist Mark Weiser published an article of his imagination about 21st century. He imagined a person living in our time and she is using a pen to cite from the newspaper. As soon as she draws out the paper, the pen messages the paper asking it to send that citation to her office. This kind of thing was referred to as ubiquitous computing by Mark Weiser. Now in 21st century, we have the Internet of Things, which basically stick to the same idea that objects around us have a computer embedded and can also communicate to each other. A more interesting example I found is this Wi-Fi password sharing function on iOS. This gives me a strange feel that these devices know others around them and talk to each other under the surface. Not likely having AI in this function, but they have the autonomous behavior to react to other iOS devices' presence. So I start to question how well this kind of thing, like machines and interfaces with autonomous behaviors, influence our experience. And do people feel the same way as I did? In terms of autonomous behavior, I was primarily inspired by Conway's Game of Life. It is a zero-player game where players only set up initial conditions and the game just keeps rolling by itself. It happens on an infinite 2D grid. Each cell on this grid following a certain set of rules. There are two things amazing about this game. The first one is that it mimics the rules of living creatures that gives you an organic feel. The other one is that although it looks meaningless at first, but the system has enormous possibilities. If you master the rules, you can even use it to make a digital clock. Unfortunately, we lost this legendary mathematician in this pandemic. May he rest in peace. One of the reasons it is so versatile is that it is a cellular automaton that each cell or agent has its own ability to react to its surroundings. We can think this as a bottom-up process, where each least elementary entity can act on their own. In comparison with the top-down process, for example, if we want to get a clock, you can get one, but it can only be a clock and nothing else. In real world, there are examples of this bottom-up design thinking. Lego will be one of the most famous examples. Its Lego block has simple form, but when they come together, they can build up many things from toys to a durable car. And in tech, there are also modular devices take on this kind of thinking, like Pallet, to meet different needs from people. It is also important to mention the idea of system and agents have been used a lot in video games. In Zelda: The Breath of Wild, basically everything is interactable, not only by the players, but also by other agents, which forms a large system and makes people immerse into the game world. In simulation games, the use of modularity also expands the gameplays can be developed by the players. For example, in Besiege, players can use simple mechanical parts to build almost any kind of machines. For this precedent, I decided to make a game-like simulation to investigate interfacing machines with autonomous behaviors. I designed 8 types of interface automata. Each one has its unique function. I also designed the rules that each interface automaton will follow. There are 3 rules. The first one is life. Each interface has a parameter called usefulness that will keep decreasing if no one interacts with it. When the usefulness comes down to 0, the automaton will disappear. The second one is self-activation, which is also one of the autonomous behaviors. Each interface will operate itself in a certain frequency, and they have different functions in activation. Like when a push button is activated, its cap will extrude. The third one is merge ability. When conditions are met, 2 automatons will merge with each other and form a new one. Imagine like Lego blocks can assemble themselves without human intervention. The merged automaton will follow the input-output pair. For example, when the input is activated, it will also activate its output automaton. In this way, the activation signal will passing down to the last output, just like a nerve system. On top of these rules, human users can also do all of them, like manually activating the automaton and merging them. Players can also choose to spawn whichever the automaton they want. I also added this future UI to allow players to get more controls over how to spawn each element, while maintaining the agency in each automaton. And here are examples of spawning automata through the UI and waving at the actual camera. While everything is developed, things are getting interesting. Normally an interface would automatically disappear if no one activates it, but because light and speaker interface can activate others in the distance, there could be feedback loops formed to keep activating each other forever, and they will never disappear. Also, when the actuation and automata merge together, they actually acquire the ability to move across the space. And here are some other examples of the gameplay. On the left, there is a light panel that can form a pattern in activation. The other one is a robot I tried to build. In the process, I just build the thing as the game goes, and in the same time, this automata also merge and form new structures, which I consider as a collaboration between us. During the testing, although people find it's hard to get started, the difficulty also motivates people to figure out the rules and continue the gameplay, and in this process, people can feel the agency in each entity in the simulation. As the machines are getting agencies and bringing us benefits, they also take away humans' privilege to interact, even for simple things like pressing a button. And you have to learn their rules very well in order to know why they exhibit the behaviors. So that's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. And now I'm going to introduce Wendy, an MFA student.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today in our online festival event. Right now, I want to share with you my thesis project. So my thesis project is called IFU, and it's a virtual immersive storytelling space that leads to a story behind the pink jacket. It critiques current society for embracing fast fashion culture and the vicious cycle of consumer shopping behavior. In Chinese, "yifu" means clothes. Coincidentally, in the same pronunciation, "yifu" means attachment. From "yifu" to "yifu", it suggests a liaison between the two vocabularies. The physical action of wearing clothes may lead to an internal transformation in having a special relationship with the item itself. "Yifu" to "yifu", this process adds value to our clothing by creating collective memories. And the memory that I want to share with you today is behind my mom's pink jacket. Walking into the exhibition space, a collective photo or display on the wall. The images are included are historical evidence from my mom's generation and are memories to many. In 1990s China, clothes were still limited, and the imported pieces were considered a rarity. In Beijing, there was a department store called Baking Friendship Store. In the beginning, when the department store opened in the 60s, they only welcomed foreigners, diplomats, and Chinese from overseas. In later years, even after the entry criteria changed, people would still need to use a foreign exchange certificate to purchase items inside. In the 1990s, my mom was a college graduate and just started working at a foreign company at the time. Her salary was only 200 yuan, which was equivalent to $30, and 10 yuan of the foreign exchange certificate. So each month she could save herself the 10 yuan of the certificate, which was equivalent to $1. Finally, one day, she kept enough savings of the certificate to purchase this pink jacket from the department store as a first employment gift to herself. Growing up in Beijing, she remembers that being a child and an elder sister, she would wear a pair of trousers and then pass it to her little brother. In times of material scarcity, of course, having a full meal was the most important thing comparing to having nice clothes. However, nowadays, it's hard for most of our generation to experience the same amount of contentment or gratification over a piece of clothing as my mother did in those times. It's also hard for our generation to imagine the scarcity of goods when we were born in a peaceful time with abundant resources. It's also hard to cherish a clothing item for so long that even the color faded, we still wouldn't throw it away. In our current society, we're constantly influenced by peer pressure, bloggers, and social media, so much that our closet is flooded with outside opinions. The internal values that clothes can bring to us are fading away. According to McKinsey report, in 2018, the average American bought around 64 to 68 new pieces of clothing per year, which is about 5 times more than in 1980. On average, each piece will be worn only 7 times before it gets tossed. This behavior creates a huge amount of pollution and brings the fashion industry to the second highest polluting industry in the world. Our clothes gain sentimental value as we wear them, and it fosters companionship between the item itself and its owner. Together, it creates memories. This is the true value behind Yifu, and this is the Yifu. If clothes could talk, what would they say? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And now I'd like to present Yashwant, an MFA student.
Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in to our virtual thesis show. I hope you're all safe and doing well amidst this crisis. I'm Yashwant and I'm an MFA Design and Technology student and I'm going to talk about my project, Muscle Sanctum. My background was in mechanical engineering where most of my focus was on solving problems and developing products for industrial usage. Now I transitioned to creative technologist where my work focuses on exploring human and spatial interactions. During my time at DT, I worked on projects that mostly fall under the categories of exploring body movements, 3D spaces, and user interactions. I came upon this really fascinating project called V-Motion Project where music was made through body movements. This project inspired me and made me rethink of how our bodies can be used as an interface for interaction design. Tying my background in problem-solving, interest in spatial computing, and curiosity in body motion interactions, I wanted to work on a practical real-life problem. So I chose to work in fitness domain because of my personal involvement and pain points with exercising, and also the fact that fitness involves a lot of body movements. So I went around fitness centers in New York City, spoke to some personal trainers and gym members. I found out that trainer to gym member ratio is very low and it is expensive to afford a personal trainer here. Also, the beginners feel gyms are an overwhelming experience to start off. That made me come up with the design question of how can I create an intervention that would provide beginners a comfortable environment for learning and performing exercises at gyms. I wanted to focus on muscle workouts because I relate to a personal problem of not being able to achieve results with consistent training, and I'm sure there are other people out there facing similar issues. And so I created an interactive visual interface system that would allow beginners at the gym to learn and perform muscle workout exercises in an effective manner. Here is the trailer of the product. Now I'll take you through the process of how this was achieved. Since I'm creating an intervention for muscle workouts, it is important to know the science behind what makes an effective workout. There are many subtle things which people often miss out while performing exercises. Research says that hypertrophy, breathing intervals, repetition duration, range of motion, progressive overload, and body form are some of the important aspects to consider while doing strength training for muscle growth. Hypertrophy is the amount of stress you provide for the muscle to tear, Generally, the last step matters the most for this phenomenon to occur. In terms of breathing, inhaling and exhaling patterns during exercises are important to maintain blood pressure. Repetition duration and range of motion are essential for providing quality of stress to your muscle. Progressive overload is necessary to increase your muscle stress threshold and not reach plateau. And finally, maintaining body posture and form is vital to avoid injuries during exercises. So I wanted to create visual interpretations of these aspects, and so I made few prototypes. The first one is to test hypertrophy and repetition count. The second one is to test for repetition duration. The third one is for breathing practice, and the fourth one is to check for body form correction. I used physical computing and game-like visuals to create these simulated experiences. User testing these prototypes yielded positive results as the users were able to follow the visuals and did necessary actions intuitively. Now the next step in my process was to combine all these layers and create a single coherent experience that could intuitively guide the users to follow all the aspects without confusion, and so I made a scene in Unity, bringing together all these visual layers. After user testing, the feedback was that the interface felt monotonous. Since this experience requires a longer time involvement, I had to make it more dynamic and immersive, and so I built a whole virtual ecosystem around this product where it falls under three categories of 3D world design, technological choices, and user experience. For the world design, I did level design in Unity and created a forest environment. The idea behind this is to bring a sense of calmness and focus to the user while performing these exercises. Muscle workouts, unlike fat-burning workouts, needs to be done at a slower, controlled pace and with concentration, hence the forest and meditative theme. In terms of technology, there are two aspects. One is the virtual trainer, which replicates the movements of a certified trainer captured in Motion Capture Studio, and the other is the user, the motion of which is captured using Kinect skeletal tracking in real time. Pose estimation and gesture recognition algorithms are used to tally these data points and provide real-time feedback during the experience. In terms of user experience, there are three folds to it. The first one is instructional design. Since this project is about learning exercises, I am using Kim's model of instructional design to create a step-by-step instructions for teaching the user about exercises during the experience. And the second part is the user interactions. I used game design principles to create visual cues and feedback mechanisms that are intuitive for users to follow. The third and final part is the sound design. In order to add an extra layer of immersion, audio feedback is also added that complements the visual experience. So these are the final renderings of how the experience looks like. For the future scope, I imagine the system to exist in the gyms with different stakeholders involved. But given the current pandemic situation, there is a demand for in-house experience, and I foresee with advancement in portable motion capture technologies and machine learning, the system can independently exist by itself and provide personalized experiences for users. And finally, stay strong and stay healthy. Thank you very much for listening. I would like to thank my advisors, Harpreet and Sularita, for pushing me to achieve this feat. Also, I would like to thank faculty Kyle, Jessica, and Andrew, and my friends Karen, Akshansh, Akanksha, Vishal, Bhavik, Sveksha, and Carolina for emotionally supporting me and guiding me throughout this project.
Thank you so much. And our next presenter is Yue, an MFA student.
Hello, everyone. Let me start the present. Hello, everyone. I'm Yue, and my project is called Snailr, a playful walking experience. I'm really glad having you all to participate and listen to my thesis presentation today. A little bit about me. I'm an international student from Beijing, China, and I came to here right after my undergrad. At the beginning, I was amazed by the city, and then gradually I felt stressful when I walking in the city. So after interviewing several people, I realized it was not only my problem. As international students, we encounter culture shock English as second language, stress of study, the unfamiliar and complicated New York City actually make us feel unsafe and overwhelming in addition. It is really easy for international students to stay at home and avoid going outside. So I started build Snailer for my thesis. My inspiration of this project came from a walk from a subway station to my campus. I was following the instruction of Google Maps on the road. My eyes were focusing on the map all the time, just to make sure I'm on the right path and didn't miss any crossroad. Suddenly, I started to think why I have to follow this direction. It always showed the same route, which is the fastest path. However, there were so many different possibilities between the two places that I can explore if I'm not in a rush. What if I can make an unreliable and imprecise navigation tool instead of this one? And this is my first prototype. My friend and I were basically wandering around our school without any plan. We found fun places such as this children's bookstore and also this coffee shop that had a garden for enjoying sunshine. They were really close to our campus, but I had never been. Their experience was memorable and inspiring for me. I started to think, what if the urban space is not only made of unfamiliar buildings and strangers, but also more like a fun playground that can be explored and investigated. So here's the Snailer. Snailer is a playful walking experience that helps international students to build place attachment to New York City. It allows players to focus on the surrounding environment. Players can feel safe and supported, and it can create maps that only matters to the player themselves. So I want to say why it is called Snailer. I combined the snail and sailor, these two characters. A snail moves really slow and close to the ground. When encounter dangers, it will go back to its shell, but they will always come back and keep moving. A sailor is someone always navigate into unknown areas bravely. I combined those two characters to imply that new international students are allowed to move slow, but they will still keep moving with fun and determination. So here's a small trailer for Snailer. Okay, that's the trailer, and I'd like to explain several functions of Snailer. The first one is put on the shell of Snailer. The shell is made of paper, and it can actually prevent people from keep looking at their phone on their way to different places. And but also allow people to use and interact with Snailer's interfaces. The second one is get the direction. The direction is not like traditional directions like north or south, but more like random prompts, such as this one. Attention, look for the direction that has manhole covers. If you follow that instruction and then look around, you may find this, or this, and even this, delicious. My idea of this function actually came from the theory of modernology and street observation from Japan designers. They actually turn modern society and street into studies. They want to study those areas just like archaeologists, and they really provided a lot of different perspectives of looking at urban spaces differently. And next function is mark with photos. This one allows players to mark places or objects that is interesting or matters to them. And then they can save it to the archive, or they can visit those places in the future. And finally, they can get an unreliable map. It's not about the precise geography of the city, but more like the mental image of the city. If they collect more of these maps, maybe players can get a sense of achievement and get the motivation to explore more. So by turning a multiple function mobile phone into a single function investigation tool, the player can explore the urban environment as a real adventure. Snailer provides opportunities and motivation for new international students to become autonomous, to care more, and get involved more in the city. Although it's designed for a specific group of people, but it can actually be used by anyone at anywhere. Even during these times, the cities become unfamiliar to a lot of people. But I just want to say we can be slow, we can be confused, and then we can be brave to face and adapt to the changing environment, just as Snailers. And thank you. Thank you to a lot of people who helped me, including Colin's class and also my family and my friends. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I love snails. Okay, and now I'd like to present our final student presenter for this session, Yang Ji.
Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Yanzhe Wu, and you can call me Yan. I'm going to talk about my thesis project called Canada Goose Origin. Canada Goose Origin is a VR goose role-playing game, which means you play as a goose in the game, going through a story of adventure. The experience invites people to think about the relationship between humans and other species in cities, especially during urbanization. And first of all, let's have a look of the video. Okay, so why did I choose Canada Goose? When I was doing research, I was inspired by the history that Canada geese changed their habit from migratory geese to resident geese 100 years ago because of humans' activities. At that time, some geese were released by some humans who had taken them as pets. Because they were pets for a long time, they lost the habit of migrating. After the geese became resident in New York City, they grew extremely fast and caused many problems to humans. Like they pooped everywhere, ate grass in parks and golf courses, caused economic influences. The government decided to take action in 2009 when a jet plane crashed on the Hudson River because it sucked two geese into its engine. The government came up with different methods to control the population of Canada goose in New York City and wiped out a portion of them. However, after several weeks from that accident, a research showed that the geese who caused the plane crash were actually normal migratory geese. But the accident drew the government's attention to the resident geese in New York City. Because I was interested in immersive technologies, I wondered if I could use an Oculus Quest as my platform. So in the context of the Canada Goose, here comes the design questions. How can we convey the idea in VR? How to make people feel inspiring as well as playful in VR? What interactions should people have in the experience? These questions are what this project is trying to explore. Now I'm going to talk about the narrative of Canada Goose origin. The narrative follows the structure, orientation, crisis, escalation, discovery, and change. This is a normal narrative structure, but in general, the game consists of three parts. Orientation, funding newspaper mission, and statue investigation. Each part plays a certain role in the experience to gradually reveal the mystery in the virtual world. In the orientation part, the player has a mission of fixing their broken nest. In the process, the player will talk to his partner called Eurydice, and players need to walk around the area and collect some twigs and mud. The purpose of the orientation is to help the player to get familiar with the environment and learn how to move, how to have conversations with characters, and how to interact with objects. As you can see, there are visual indicators and instruction text leading the player to learn and complete the mission. After the player fixes the nest, they will find that the partner Eurydice is missing, which leads to the next part. In the second part, the player will meet with another character called Joseph, who is a goose with the greatest wisdom in the park. Joseph will tell the player that there are many geese that went missing recently and ask the player to find a newspaper to acquire more information. As you can see, the player will not have visual indicators in this part now because they need to explore and observe in the game. After the newspaper, Joseph will read the newspaper and ask the player to investigate a statue built recently, which leads to the third part. The statue is on a little island where the player will find the partner Eurydice. It turns out that Eurydice was caught by some park staff, but luckily she escaped. After the player found Eurydice, Joseph came and checked the statue. He will tell the truth that humans are trying to wipe out all the geese in the park, and they need to leave. However, players just fix their nest and have eggs to protect. In the end, players have three choices to make. First one, live with Eurydice. Second one, stay to protect their eggs and ask Joseph to take care of Eurydice. And third one, stay with Eurydice to protect the eggs. As the narrative becomes more and more complete, the world building is changed in order to lead players to go through the story. This is the final park landscape of the game. As you can see, the game area is restricted by some brushes or obstacles. Players will be guided to explore all the areas. All right, this is my project, Thesis project, Canada Goose Origin. Thanks to all the audiences who are listening. Thanks to my parents, and thanks to Jesse, Sven, Jessica, Loretta, Kyle, Asqua, and all the DT fellow students for all the support. I sincerely appreciate that. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you everyone for your really awesome presentations. And now I'm gonna start the Q&A session, which is gonna be moderated by Dr. Micha Cardenas. She is an assistant professor of games and playable media, digital arts and new media, and critical race and ethnic studies at UC Santa Cruz. She is an artist/theorist who works in augmented reality, digital performance, and trans of color poetics. Her book, Poetic Operations, Trans of Color Art and Digital Media, is forthcoming from Duke University Press. And with that, I'd like to start the Q&A session.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much. Okay, so sorry, I just have a question. So how many, I'm going to give feedback to all the projects, right? How many minutes do I have to do that? Dahi?
Until like 7:15-ish.
Yeah, you got 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, 15. Okay. Yeah. And then the Q&A, and then other people have a chance to ask questions. Is that the Q&A session?
Yeah, we have a little time, so I can if we have a little more time, I can ask people to ask their questions.
Okay, great. Awesome. Just getting my bearings. Wow. Okay. I mean, such beautiful projects. I mean, I'm so impressed with all these projects, and really honored to be asked to respond to them because they were beautiful and compelling, and really every single one of you should just be applauded so hugely for accomplishing this in this really difficult time. I mean, you've really accomplished something amazing. So I'm just going to go in order because I have all these notes in order, and hopefully I have some useful feedback. So Ian's project, Define Madness. So I did get a chance to look at the website and see most of these projects ahead of time, but I really appreciated the presentations of them as well. So yeah, I really like this project. I mean, it's a really impressive amount of detail, and like the architecture that you put in there is also really compelling. As somebody who doesn't know how to do 3D modeling or doesn't really do the kind of hands-on 3D modeling, it's quite impressive. I really like the cleverness of the self-referential library, or like a library of assets to make a library. I think is a funny and interesting gesture. And so I did have some questions. I mean, okay, so my initial question is why, so in the narrative of the project, there's like the scholars lead to madness, study leads to madness, which is funny and interesting comment on academia. But why does that happen? Like some more bridging of that narrative would help. And I mean, when I think about madness, immediately I think about disability studies and all of the critiques of madness, and even the like mad pride movement. So in the story, what comes up for me is why does study lead to madness, and what's the place of madness in the study story, and how could disability studies help us think more critically about madness? I guess the last question I had was, where do we see the madness in the library? Not just for the people in the library, but, you know, when I think about divine madness in a library, I think about Jorge Luis Borges, or Borges's Library of Babel. And, you know, I think you could bring more madness to the actual structure of the library. Yes, this is for Ian. So I think you could bring more madness into the actual structure and the visuals in the library. But overall, really great job. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, So the next project was Zihao's project, the interface automata. And somebody said in the chat that it was beautiful. I absolutely agree. I mean, wow. The use of light, the background, the way the movement goes, the way the objects come together. I mean, the animation, the modeling, the visuals were very beautiful. So that was impressive.
I'm going to talk about my project, which is a
I
digital
really very
memorial
much
to the
appreciate
victims of the
your
China-
thinking about bottom-up structures. The analysis was really interesting, and the Legos was such a good example. And then taking that from Legos to Internet of Things, I think was really interesting move as well. And so you talked about 8 types and 3 different rules. I don't think I got what that. I didn't have the time to write down what all the 8 types were, but the rules were interesting. And as you were describing that, it made me want to talk about assemblage theory in Deleuze and Manuel de Landa's work. So I think that might be an interesting reference to look at to keep going with this project. You know, Gilles Deleuze talked about assemblages of machines as having 2 different dimensions of communication between the parts. And my brain is in quarantine and I can't remember the other dimension of Deleuze's assemblages, but I think assemblage theory really comes to mind when looking at this project. So the images you showed the way some of the parts were merging together in this really interesting and, you know, like automata, in this really interesting organic way, which I think raised some really exciting possibilities of thinking about organic user interfaces versus clean user interfaces. So the rules that you laid out around, you know, certain interface objects disappearing if they're not used over time was really interesting, a way of thinking about futures of designing interfaces if they're going to be visual interfaces. So yeah, again, I just want to applaud you for a really impressive project, and I love to see where it goes, and to see how thinking about assemblages as a way of thinking and thinking about everything as assemblages could maybe expand the thinking in your project or help you refine the different types and different rules. Okay, so Wendy's project Yifu is critiquing fast fashion. So I think a really timely and important project. And again, very beautiful. I really appreciate the last question about what would clothes say if they could speak, and taking this one object of clothing of the your mother's pink jacket, and then articulating this beautiful story of migration and technology and economics that all come together in the image of this one pink jacket. I'm really surprised about that statistic that you shared about 64 pieces of clothing worn 7 times. I mean, strange and disappointing statistic. I would love to see the source of that and know more about that. But that question of fast fashion, I think really we can really reconsider in this moment. So you talked about our generation or your generation being unfamiliar with a scarcity of goods. And I think that is a really important question to be engaging right now during the pandemic and COVID-19. And how might we use this moment as an opportunity to transform society in positive ways? And how might this scarcity of goods that a lot of us are experiencing now be transformed into an experience that might lead to more sustainability? And I think that creating that narrative that you're putting forward in the game is really very, very important. So yeah, thank you so much for a really timely and beautiful, personal, important piece. Okay. So Yashwant, the Muscle Sanctum project. I found this project really interesting. And oh, yes, you're welcome, Wendy. Y'all should feel free to respond to me over email. I don't know if you have a chance to respond during this time in this meeting. But Yashwant, the Muscle Sanctum project, again, the visuals were very beautiful. I mean, really an impressive technical achievement. I see the really interesting combination of taking a design challenge that you really do personally, and then studying the existing literature and the science and doing user testing, and then coming up with a really interesting and novel scenario for people to get healthy and stay healthy and build muscle in. So yeah, really impressive achievement. And, I think, as you said in your last words in the presentation, stay strong, stay healthy, right? It's really relevant and important question for us right now is how to do that, maybe with VR or how to do that at home in general, right? We might not have access to trainers. So questions that I often have when I look at design projects are, who's the audience? And I always really encourage my my design students to think about specific audiences. If you maybe to develop personas, like multiple different personas, I don't know if you did that, but to think about, designing for a range of races and genders and maybe ages and abilities. If you want to define a really specific and narrow audience, that's fine. You can totally go in that direction, but I just want that to be stated because it felt a bit like designed for people just like you, which is okay, and that's often a good first step to go with design. But then beyond that, to think about personas for the audiences that you might want to reach. I felt like the correction feedback felt like it didn't fit in the environment. And I know it's important to give people like timely feedback that they'll respond to, but I felt like, okay, here we are, we're in the forest. And then, the correction feedback felt more of like a prototype part. Like it could have been smoother or cleaner or more well integrated. And even that could be its own whole really interesting exploration of like how to give correction in a way that fits, that's not so jarring, or that fits into this larger scene you've created of building, emotional health alongside physical health. So I think that, the Connect is a really important example of thinking about having different kinds of users that you're testing with. So I did want to hear more about like who were the kinds of users that you tested with. And I guess the last question that I have is like in thinking about audience, that would help you differentiate the project from how it's different from like Wii Fitness or the Switch games for fitness. I haven't done like a good market study of those, but I think there's a lot of room for fitness apps for people with non-normative bodies and genders, and there's lots of reasons why gyms can be really bad experiences for a lot of people. So I think there's a lot of room for your project to reach a lot of people.
Thank you. Can I answer those questions? Is that?
I think I only have 3 more minutes, so let me finish the 2 feedbacks.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, no worries.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go a couple minutes over, I think. So yes, UI Snailer project. I did see this on the website, and I really love this project. It's great. I really appreciate the cute UI. I wish I just had more of that in my life in general. Also, I think really timely and relevant when we're dealing with UIs. We're dealing with user interfaces at every moment in, okay, thanks, Allison. When we're even more dealing with UI, user interface in our every moment, it becomes, I think, even more important to have designs for UIs that can be gentle and that can be, playful. I really appreciate the psychogeography idea. I teach psychogeography to a lot of my students. So I think that it's a great design technique and just a great way to come up with ideas. I also think that in general that we need more slow and playful technology. So that combination that you came up with there in the Snailer idea, I think is really great. So the I think also the idea of putting on a paper shell on the phone is a really good idea to limit the amount of functionality and goes with the overall concept, right, of having a UI that can be more more gentle or more, I don't know, softer or I don't know, maybe healthier or something. So yeah, the paper shell is really interesting. I would, and the idea of modernology was really fascinating. I had never heard that term before, so I really appreciate hearing about it. I think that I would encourage you to look at other locative media artists. So there is a group that made a random urban hikes app as media art, and I sadly cannot remember their name right now. I know they showed it in Los Angeles, so maybe the name will come to me. But they're a locative media ecological art group thinking about random urban hikes. But I still feel like your unique take on it, which is, this playful design take on it, is really important in terms of like the need that we have to work towards technology that's more sustainable in an emotional way. So, reducing functions on the phone, I think is a really smart approach. So thank you. Really great project.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so Jan's project, the Canada Goose Origin game, also really awesome and impressive. I mean, I just said wow so many times looking at all of your projects. So great work. You probably hear this a lot, that it reminds me of Untitled Goose Game. I'm sure you've looked at Untitled Goose Game, and it's kind of like a more thoughtful Untitled Goose Game, which I love. I mean, a lot of people love Untitled Goose Game, and I think we do need more games that are less violent and that are cute and that are like from a cute animal's perspective. But you're bringing to it what's missing from that game. Because frankly, Untitled Goose Game held my attention for like 5 minutes. And your project, I think, is really fascinating in many dimensions. So thinking about the interspecies interaction between humans and the animals that we spend our lives with, I think is a really important direction. That and that's ultimately the direction that I would encourage or ask about for you to keep going in. I really appreciate the metaphor of thinking about geese as people that, as animals that were migratory, but that are now an integrated part of society. That's a really interesting metaphor there. I also really appreciate and think is important the local New York context adds a lot of value to the story or in the narrative you're telling. The narrative design was very carefully done, and it was just great, really well done, thinking about the 3 components of it across those 3 levels of your game. I love the nesting idea. I think that there's so much richness in the concept of nesting, especially as we're all forced to be in our homes right now and do a lot of nesting, maybe, hopefully. There's a really beautiful book called Edges and Fray, which I forget the author's name, but it's right over there on my shelf. That's all about thinking about nesting as a metaphor for poetry and philosophy. And I'll grab that title after this. So I was really impressed overall. I guess the main question that I have is, thinking about Donna Haraway and When Species Meet, her book, When Species Meet, I think a question that she's asking a lot in that book, or centrally asking, is what can we learn from interspecies relations and interspecies communication and interactions that we couldn't learn any otherwise. So what can we learn from geese in particular is my question. How can you take that perspective of the goose, and go even farther with it in terms of the interspecies collaboration? I think Natalie Jeremijenko is a great artist who's also in New York, I think at NYU, who writes a lot and makes a lot of artwork in this interspecies collaboration mode, who would be a good person to look at. But yeah, really great work. And I'm going to grab that book for that name and put it in the chat. Thank you all so much.
Amazing. Thank you, Micha. Okay, now if any of the students want to respond to her questions, feel free to do so. And we can also start taking some questions from the chat. Would any of yeah, you can respond first.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for the feedback, Misha. I did really think of the questions that you asked. So during my process, so at first I started off focusing on millennials and Gen Z, and then I started off with doing this intervention inside a gym, because a lot of beginners who start out at the gym feel it's an overwhelming experience to see all the machines and a lot of people working out over there. So I wanted this system to be like an intermediary system where people can learn about doing exercises in an effective way, and then move on to the weight section or the machine section. So that's where I thought maybe like personal trainers would be really helpful for people who have health complications. But whereas this system, I'm focusing on who are in good health condition, but they actually want to get started in muscle training or muscle growth or body or weightlifting, things like that. So hence, my age group, I targeted my age group as around 18 to 35. But again, because of this COVID situation, like there's a lot of requirement for in-house experience, in-house system. So I thought I could modify this experience to be had something like an in-house product where people can just follow the exercises and do it effectively without the need of an external trainer or external help. But overall, yeah, both the cases I've kind of considered in case the requirement for gym comes up. This would also be helpful.
We have a question from the chat here. Colleen asked Yue, have you thought of different ways your project is impacted by quarantine?
Yes, I think I was because we are not allowed to explore the city freely at this moment. So I was thinking, for example, projecting Google Earth on the wall or on the fabric, and then use Sneller to navigate into different places by clicking Google Earth's button, trying to do this virtual journey. So it won't focus too much on we don't have to go outside, but still can give an opportunity to know the city more. But I think the idealist way to use it is still going outside, because there's so much details that we cannot see on virtual or online.
Thanks, Yue.
Okay.
Thank you, Colleen.
Amazing. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody that presented. Thank you to our guest moderator, Dr. Micha. And we're going to be taking a really short 5-minute break before our next session. Okay, we're back from our short little break for session 2 of tonight. And again, my name is Dahi Lee, a BFA student, and I am the student moderator. And yeah, welcome back from our cute little break. And if you all are joining now, please remember to turn off your cameras and mute your microphones when y'all aren't talking. And we also have a really awesome guest moderator for our Q&A, Nicole He. And we have an awesome line of 5 students that are presenting both from the MFA and BFA program. This will run from around now to around 8:20-ish and followed by a Q&A session. So if we're all good to go, I would like to introduce our first student, Mariah, who is an MFA student.
Hey, I'm Mariah Marasco, creator and director of the upcoming web series, The Drive-Thru Therapist. I'm so happy to have you guys here. So today I'm going to answer a bunch of questions, some things about the series itself, what you can expect, and then also some of my own creative inspirations and my favorite things. And then after that, I'm going to take you through some of the updates that were made to the scripts for the episodes after the pandemic made it so that it wasn't able to be shot in person. But first, here's a sneak peek.
I mean, think about it. People hardly have time as it is. I want to give people that outlet. Somewhere they can feel not judged. Fit it into their daily routine.
Hey, Sylvia.
You know, it's okay to have these feelings.
It makes me lose my shit. Like every time I say it, it loosens a screw.
Okay. And how does that affect your composure at work?
My composure? It shouldn't be so bad, right? I mean, my life is a comedy movie, literally. But if that's the worst of my problems...
What if you kept a stress ball behind the counter?
A stress ball? You're telling me to squeeze a ball for stress relief? Okay, they have the nerve to bother me on my break. This better be good.
But this is your time.
Alright, so now for some questions. Each episode is roughly 5 to 7 minutes. Sylvia is 32 years old. She grew up in Maine. She's quirky, she's maternal, and she tells it like it is. So too many of the therapy depictions out there in film and television and across the web are very negative and overly dramatized. And especially now, we all need something that can make us laugh. The characters and their situations and what they discuss at Sylvia's window are based off of conversations with peers, survey results, and also conversations and interviews with a real therapist. I would say the most shocking result was that out of 48 respondents, only 2 people mentioned that they would prefer a dark or overly serious depiction. Everyone else basically said they would either prefer it not to be too serious or actually use comedy and make it funny. Wardrobe is overly exaggerated to really paint this visual picture of who these people are and kind of make them a type within society. Props, there's not many props that can be used in such a small format of a therapy window, so while we do see cutaways to the characters in their actual settings, we're mostly at the window. So a book that Sylvia might be reading as a customer walks up, things like that, so that they can tell us really about who these people are in a really short period of time. People are more likely to be alone while watching a web series, and it's a more intimate experience than watching a normal TV show. Each episode ends on a hook. I'm a big sucker for a cliff ending, so that definitely played a role. Veep. Or Game of Thrones. Larry David. Quentin Tarantino. Recently, Parasite. So after the credits rolled, when I saw Little Women in the theater in film, I sat there silently for about 5 minutes. Well, I love High Maintenance and the story of how that went from a web series to a full-on TV production. But most recently I watched The Tea, and it's absolutely amazing. I hope you enjoyed the answers to these questions. When the pandemic hit, this project was just about to shoot, so a lot of adjusting had to happen. And one thing that a lot of content creators are doing right now is seeing how you can take an idea and actually push it forward without having an in-person shoot in the traditional sense where everybody is together in the same place. Now I'm going to take you through a couple lines in the script specifically where you could just make a couple small tweaks to make it work in an audio-only format or to make it work in a virtual format where you can shoot it through the computer without being together in person.
So starting our first example where this piece would be transformed into an audio-only format, we would have to take a look at anything where it's only visual in the description and see how we could change that to audio. So in this case, we're looking at Matthew picking up his phone, and originally he just gives a look to Sylvia, but now we would have him actually address it with her verbally. So here we see Matthew squeezing the stress ball under the counter, and because we wouldn't be able to see that anymore, this is one way that we could address that. All right, so for this one, Sylvia is reading a book about Italian romance. So this is a prop, again, that we wouldn't be able to see in an audio-only format. This is a book that Sylvia is reading about Italian romance. For this example, this would be assuming that we are now shooting this virtually. So we do have visuals, but we're only able to shoot it virtually without having the actors together in person. So one of the big things that we could use is desktop recordings. So instead of her actually being seen reading a book, we could take a screen recording of her desktop, similar to how this is being done right now in the example. And we could just have her actually come across an article that is of that topic that we had originally wanted.
That's it. Thanks for joining, and be sure to follow the Drive-Thru Therapist on Instagram for more updates on when you can see this online. Okay, now go follow it.
Thank you so much. And next, I would like to introduce Carolina, an MFA student.
All right, can everybody see that? Great. So my name is Carolina, and I'm a design and technology graduate. My work explores ecology and sustainability in the Anthropocene through art and technology. With that, let's dive right in. So, have you ever tried to put yourself in someone else's shoes? How about a plant's? It's a far stretch, right? After all, everything we think, do, and live is inevitably from a human's perspective. So is it possible to break away from our human-centric view? And if accomplished, how might this change the way we perceive life around us? These are the questions I explore in my thesis, A Mile in the Roots. I'd like to start by reading a poem authored by a monstera, a plant, about their perspective on time. Tricky time scale, slipping away, slow to respond as my cells grow. Internal commitment that ticks and talks, clock of biological movements. Minutes to hours, your hours to my days. You could never beat my steady pace. Elusive patterns of my intricate dance, lost in time to the impatient soul. So why focus on plants? Well, for one thing, plants are known as primary producers, which means they support life for most food chains and ensure the survival of the majority of organisms. And we're no exception to that. If you take a second to consider our lives in the terms of our dependence on plants, you quickly start to realize just how consequential their role is in the grand scheme of things. Take this quote by plant geneticist and author Daniel Shamovitz. I won't read the full thing, but the highlighted text gives you an idea of things that we depend on or use on a daily basis, generally derived from plants. Houses made of wood, coffee brewed from coffee beans. So given our undeniable dependence on plants, why not make a bigger effort to better understand their perspective? A year ago, I presented a project called An Organic Dialogue. It was my attempt to envision what interspecies communication might look like. This was the early beginnings of my thesis exploration. I thought about the shared traits of life among all living beings, and from there, I speculated on how to simplify an interaction based on those elements. The final result was an interaction that registered biosignals from both a human and a plant, and translated those signals into ecologically relevant mediums, in this case, light for plants and sound for humans. I began to think more about perception in general and how human perception is usually summed up in the 5 senses that we all know. If you look closely, you'll notice that each sense has a clear correspondence to a single body organ, sight to eyes, smell to nose. But the reality is that depending on how you define a sense, we're actually known to have somewhere between 14 to 20 senses. To give you a brief example of 2, we also have the vestibular sense that dictates our balance and coordination, and the proprioception sense, which refers to our internal awareness of our body parts in space. There seems to be an interesting connection between the senses we are less familiar with and the lack of a straightforward association to a body organ. For instance, the functions carried out by these 2 additional senses cannot be neatly summarized by referring to one organ. This is precisely the case with plants. They can perceive much of the same information that we can. It's just that their methods for doing so are much more intricate and less apparent. And so I decided to frame this thesis in the context of 3 senses we already know: smell, sight, and touch. One sense we are not as familiar with, proprioception, referred to as gravity in this project. And finally, one additional sense that I'm proposing should be included, that being time, as well as a lack of a corresponding organ with which to perceive it. And for time, although both humans and plants can sense it, we do so on entirely different scales. And I believe this contributes to why plants seem so different from us. With my thesis, I want to invoke the provocation that in order to better understand a non-human entity, we need to step outside our human perception, even if only briefly. Throughout my research, I was particularly inspired and guided by Daniel Shamovitz's book, What a Plant Knows, which discusses the sensory system of plants. In it, he also recounts numerous scientific experiments and studies that have been done in the past to prove different theories about plant senses. So before COVID-19, my initial vision for this project had been a physical installation meant to exhibit the results of experiments inspired by this book. I experimented with time, smell, and gravity. For time, I attempted to recalibrate my time scale to better match that of a plant's. For smell, a parasitic plant called the dodder has been proven to exhibit olfactory preferences. So I set out to plant tomato, wheat, and dodder seeds to experiment with what the final results might look like. And finally, for gravity, I experimented with the idea of disorienting plants by hanging and rotating them to see if their roots would actually reorient based on the gravitational pull. Given the current situation, I decided to pivot towards a digital form over a physical form, but still keep the experimentation aspect as an important part of my own perspective-taking journey. I transformed the knowledge I gained about plant senses into poetry, or what I like to call first plant narratives, as opposed to first person. The poetry allowed me to capture the scientific context behind plant sensory systems, while also giving me the creative liberties needed to envision a plant's point of view. By focusing on acrostic poetry, in which the first letter of each line spells out a word, I was also able to better highlight the senses I wanted to bring attention to. I was equally careful in selecting which plant species would be coupled with what sense, informed by research on ecological relevance as well as the experiments I carried out at home. This poetry is complemented by a web interaction that allows a user to decode the poetry into text they can understand. This speaks to the underlying ideas that a first plant narrative is not going to be immediately accessible by a human, but most importantly, that it takes time, effort, and patience to take on a new perspective, especially a non-human one. I'd like to extend a big thank you to my thesis instructors, Harpreet, Loretta, Kyle, and Jessica, my unconditionally supportive partner, Zach, my close friend, Paul, my lovely parents, everyone that made this virtual festival possible, and to everyone tuning in today. Mil gracias a todos. Thank you all for your support.
Thank you so much. And now I'd like to introduce our next student, Zena, an MFA student.
Hi everyone, welcome to my live stream. I'm excited to have you guys and to talk to you guys about my project, Life Underground. To put it briefly, Life Underground is an immersive audio experience that encourages active ridership and invites participation in the documentation of the collective life of the New York City subway. A final version of Life Underground takes shape as a web application, which enables users to access and navigate through a series of audio playlists as they ride the subway. Each playlist is unique to a subway line and direction, and it's filled with crowdsourced anecdotes, soundscapes specific to the stations, and the spaces in between. It's designed for a context that's ridden with issues, so Life Underground isn't really designed to fix problems, but create an experience out of communal memory of subway riders. It's designed to be an ever-changing library of transient stories, allowing rider listeners to contribute with their personal thoughts and anecdotes to build upon them with their own voices. So, according to Tonala and Kornblum, we become New Yorkers on the subway. It's kind of like a rite of passage. I've kind of always looked at the subway like the veins that pulse throughout the city. In fact, coming from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, a city that's about to open its first ever metro system, I was always intrigued about the societal changes that might come along with that. And I guess, whether we're aware of it or not, the density and compactness of the subway allows us for those moments of social interaction, whether passive or active, that we get every day. It's those doses of social interaction that keep us sane and sometimes safe. And when I first started this project, it was an interesting time for the MTA, to say the least. Subway fare evasion campaigns and increased policing sparked a series of protests all throughout the city. And to me, it felt like these protests were some of the rare times that subway riders came together, united as community, to fight for the right to accessible mobility. But in reality, it's not just about mobility. To me, it was about the right to access a modern-day urban commons. A space or place that enables some people, like the churro cart lady, to make a living, others to entertain, and essentially to contribute to a life that is just as much of the New York City experience as the life that's happening above ground. And the way that this context played a role in the creation of Life Underground was that it made me realize that I don't want to just romanticize the subway narratives. I kind of wanted to also highlight those tensions in the background. So the noises that I incorporated kind of were designed to ground the listener in the realities of the subway system, the good and the bad. And the vision that I have for Life Underground is that it is constantly dynamic and updating. The playlists being renewed weekly or, according to the inflow of submissions. And while I initially hoped for it to be an MTA project, I now see its value more as a grassroots initiative or community-driven project, because a significant trait of this project is the freedom to highlight some of the ugly truths that the MTA might not want to bring forward. But I can't really talk about the vision that I have for this project without really addressing the realities of our current situation and the subway in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. It seems like nowadays the density of the city is a double-edged sword. For what seems to be the last 3 decades leading up to this pandemic, New York actually used its density and wealth to increase life expectancy for even its most vulnerable residents. And the subway plays a part in that because it actually reduces the chances of traffic accident, provides people that healthy little short walk to and from their station. Now, however, it seems like the density and the subway itself is to blame for the staggering COVID-19 death toll that has taken the city. The New York City subway has been transformed, for the time being, to a vehicle for essential workers to save lives by risking their own, and for those who risk their lives because they can't afford not to. It has also become a refuge for homeless people who need a night's rest. And despite the reduction in service and newly enforced 1 to 5 a.m. shutdown, which is the first in its history, the subway has also become a contributing factor to why, so far, more than 80 MTA workers have lost their lives to the coronavirus. Nevertheless, subway ridership has gone down at least 90% since the beginning of this pandemic, essentially scattering its community of riders all around as they socially isolate. And while the majority of us socially isolate, many of us find ourselves missing the subway, missing the moments that we've taken for granted during our daily commutes. It's funny how something that we once dreaded is now something that we more or less look forward to. And while people are socially distancing, remaining 6 feet away from each other at all times, I can't help but wonder whether New Yorkers are suddenly going to embrace the concept of personal space again, or if we're just going to go back to the way things were once all of this blows over. During this time, I envision Life Underground to be brought to life by the memories and experiences of us, the scattered community, the people that are missing it and nostalgic over the moments that we had neglected previously. But I also envision Life Underground to be brought to life by the people that are still currently riding, the thoughts, fears, worries of the essential workers that are still taking their trips on the still crammed subways and recording through that a really historical moment in the infrastructure's narrative. And while I created Life Underground to be experienced on a commute, will it ever, could it be a tool that promotes the rebirth of this life after a really long hiatus? Or is it just going to be a bittersweet memorial to something that will never really go back to what it was? Thank you guys for listening. If you're interested in the project, make sure to check it out in the project page. You could listen to the playlist, or if you're feeling nostalgic, leave your own contribution. Excited to hear your questions. Bye!
Amazing. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to introduce Janae, an MFA student.
Wait, what? Okay. Wait, where's my PowerPoint? Okay, here it is. Okay. You can hear everything fine, right? No complaints. Okay, so hello, my name is Janae Lloyd, and I will be presenting my thesis in the Life on Linux. It is a board game inspired by Monopoly that looks at the Harlem Renaissance. For those of you that don't know, the Harlem Renaissance, or as it was known in the 20s, the New Negro Movement, was one of, if not the first major explosion of Black creativity and literature, music, visual arts, and fashion in the United States. Though it was in various locations across the United States, the center of the movement was in Harlem. And the reason that it started is because following World War I, the United States limited immigration, and so that left a lot of jobs available in the North. And so a lot of Black soldiers and other Black people in the South saw that as an opportunity to come up to the North and take those jobs. And Harlem was one of the main places that they settled in. And part of this movement is actually known as the Great Migration. And the reason that I actually explain this is because one of the primary reasons for my thesis is education. And I'm showing reviews of the Ava DuVernay biopic Selma. And I use that because it is an example of how media could give attention to an event or a time period that doesn't get covered in traditional textbooks. Thinking about my own education in AP US history when I was a junior in high school, and we learned about the Civil Rights Movement, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act were often combined together as examples of the success of the Civil Rights Movement. And the Selma March was not mentioned as being influential to passing the Voting Rights Act. This was in 2013, and I like to believe that a lot has changed about how history is taught, but it doesn't change the fact that American students are required to learn over 200 years of history in just 9 months, which means that certain time periods do get overlooked. Specifically, a 2017 report on social studies and education done by the National Women's History Museum showed that only 17 states teach the Harlem Renaissance, 17 states plus the District of Columbia. And even in some of these states, the Harlem Renaissance is taught in combination with the Roaring Twenties and the Jazz Age, so it's not really its own separate thing. For this reason, I believe that games, similar to film, through their interactivity, can give a spotlight to historical events and people that are often overlooked by traditional textbooks. So to the game itself, the primary goal of In the Life on Linux is to accumulate the most wealth, which is a combination of the amount of money you have at the end of the 15 turns, plus the values of the properties at the end of your turn. Every property on the board correlates to an important location in a time period. Either it is a famous person's address, or it is a work location, or in the case of two of them, mainly the 135th Street Schomburg collection. That's where the Schomburg collection is, and the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Life, and 155th Street Brooklyn Palace was the location for the annual Hamilton Balls. And so most of the rules of the game are similar to Monopoly, but some important changes is that one, players start with $100 and they gain $20 each time they pass go. And instead of going to jail, players can actually be evicted if they own property. And similar to Monopoly, you can get out of eviction if you have a rent-free card, which is the equivalent of the get out of jail free card. And another thing that is actually that I included in the game is that you could also throw a rent party in order to avoid eviction. And what a rent party is that it can be called for when a player is facing eviction, or it can be called when a player lands on a property that they have already rented a previous turn. And the community chest cards, which is seen right here on the right, is also an example of when a rent party called. And the way the rent party works is that players, they pay an upfront cost to have the party, and then they roll the dice to determine its success. If the dice roll is 6 or higher, it's 2 dice, so there's actually a high chance of success. Then the party is successful, and if not, then it was a failure. It was important to me to include the rent party mechanic due to its importance to the Black residents of Harlem during the Renaissance. And another important aspect of the game for me is the park cards. This one is 136th Street, Niggerati Manor. included on this property card and all the other property cards is a fun fact at the bottom in relation to that property. This one specifically is about the Niggerati and how that was an important group of creatives and intellectuals during the time period, and specifically the Niggerati Manor, which I believe is 246 West 130th Street. That was specifically the home of playwright Wallace Thurman. And so the property cards, the chance cards, and the community chess cards all work together to not only inform the rent party, but also teach players of the game about important people during the time period. And specifically, I wanted to focus on rent parties because it was a thing that was accessible to everyone in Harlem. There were it was a form of nightlife that was accessible to everyone in Harlem. There were other forms of nightlife like clubs and bars that Black people did not have access to, though they could perform there. So that's why I think the rent party was the best mode. And essentially what a rent party was is that they were private parties held in apartments. The host charged a fee for entrance, food, and alcohol. It was also during the 18th Amendment. Prohibition ran wild, but Harlem was a police-free zone. The police didn't go there a lot. And the money gained from the party went towards the host's rent. This was often necessary as landlords charged Black residents at least twice the amount for rent as white residents with half the amenities. Housing court was not a solution as Black residents were often told they should just move out if they have a problem. And for me in particular, I focused on the importance of rent parties for queer people in my research. So during the time period, one of the only people that was out as gay was writer and artist Richard Bruce Newt. And Mabel Hampton, a dancer and a founder of the Lesbian Her Story Archive, used the term "in the life" to describe queer folks during the time. It's actually where the name of the game comes from, In the Life on Lenox. It's about like gay people on Lenox Avenue. And Harlem, along with Greenwich Village, was considered tolerant of queer folks in the neighborhood, but there were still dangers to being queer. Like you could get arrested for public indecency if you were caught in drag, and if you were caught in the train station bathroom with another person of your gender, you could also get in trouble. And Harlem, along with Greenwich Village, was considered the most tolerant areas for queer people in the United States. But there were still a lot of people that did not like that. There were some church leaders, such as Adam Clayton Powell Sr., who said that queer people and also promiscuous straight Black women were put the traditional Black family and Black middle class in danger. And also one of the only instances of public queerness, which was the Hamilton Lodge Masquerade Ball, was also subject to a lot of voyeurism from upper middle class white people who were coming up to view the ball from the Village, Financial District, and all these other lower parts of Manhattan in order to see the costumes, the fashion, and to see female impersonators. That was the term at the time for drag queen. And as far as these people that are right here, this is Gladys Bentley on the top right, on the top left. She is one of the most famous, she is the most famous lesbian during the time period and one of the most famous people there. She is a pianist that often performed at the Clam House. She was known for wearing her tuxedos, which is considered men's clothing, and also walking around with her wife girlfriend along 7th Avenue in that same getup. To her right is Richard Buse Nugent. As I said before, he was one of the few people during the time period who was openly queer. Bottom left is Mabel Hampton and her wife, Lillian Foster. Lillian Foster actually gave Mabel Hampton an invitation to a rent party days after they met at a bus stop. And to their right is Alelia Walker, who is the daughter of Madam C.J. Walker, the first self-made Black female millionaire. And she earned her money through hair care products. And Alelia Walker following her mother's death and she inherited her mother's money, she would actually host parties at her mansion on 136th Street. And the mansion, there was experimentation going on at the parties at the mansion, and it was all completely allowed. So I think of this as examples of how the rent party could be like A'Lelia Walker and Mabel Hampton and Lillian Foster, how all of that can be used as examples of the ways in which the rent party protected people and allowed them to experiment with people of the same gender without fear of legal or societal persecution. And these are just like all the property cards. This is what they all look like. There are 12 properties in total, 3 for each color, and they all have a fun fact on the bottom. There are 15 chance cards as front and back, and it's different things along with the chance cards. There's also the community chess cards. Unlike in traditional Monopoly, the community chess cards could be good or bad, but for this one, I decided to make them all like you all gain money or you can potentially gain a property. So there is nothing bad with these community chess cards. Chance cards, there are some of them that like bad things could happen to you. And this is a playtest that I did. It was through Zoom, so there are a lot of things going on. And I just want to thank my playtesters before I play the video. 22nd Street. Jenny owns Barnard, Kat owns Columbia, so there can't be a monopoly either way. So I'll just pass O. I will do my role as the banker, and I will auction off 122nd Street. What does that mean? Oh, it means that 3 of you take turns trying to outbid each other for this property.
Can we start below asking price?
We're gonna start with $1.
I'll bid it all.
All right. Kristen, 122nd Street. Huh?
I heard $1 was bid, so I'm bidding $2.
All right, $2. Jenny.
I'll bid 2.5. My screen share is like
$3. All right. Do I hear $4?
$5.
Guys, better 5. 5. Do I hear 6?
I got 6.
I hear 6. Do I hear 7?
$10.
I hear $10. Do I hear 11?
Wait, what property are we talking about?
122nd Street.
Wait, isn't that the street? Isn't that the place I'm at?
Yes, that's where you're at.
Oh, what's so special about this place?
I don't know. It's property. It's Monopoly. $10.
You go through last. I'll do 11.
Okay, so 1/6 is Kat, 1/17 is Jenny, and I passed on buying 122nd. So that's where the option.
That's where that is now.
All right, Kat says 15. Chris, you say 16.
Are we on turn 5 or 6?
We're on turn 5.
Do a recap of who owns the rest of the properties on board.
117, 116 is Kat, 17 is Jenny, Collection is me, and the Niggerati Manor is Kat.
Yeah, I follow them too. Okay, I'm doing 16.
16. Do I hear 17?
20.
20. All right. Kristen, do I hear 21?
I'm so sorry, but we actually have to.
All right.
On to the next example. Running out of time. Sorry.
This is so like just to wrap it up, I just want to thank everyone, my thesis professors, Aneshka, Anna, Jessica, John and Colleen for their feedback. The new school debate team, they were really supportive. And also my playtesters, Kat, Jenny, Chris, Bright, Yash, Elijah, Safi, Kelly, Sharafina, Chelsea, and Dominique. And yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And our next presenter is Kat, an MFA student.
That was probably.
I'm Catherine Obermeyer. Thanks so much for watching my festival presentation. I'm going to talk about my project, which is a digital memorial to the victims of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. My project, Augmented Remembrance, is focused on the stories of women who died in the fire over 100 years ago. But before we can talk about the project, we need to have a quick history lesson. On a beautiful day, March 25th, 1911, 146 people perished in a fire at the Ash Building, located in Greenwich Village in New York City. The vast majority of these victims were young immigrant women under the age of 24. This was a tragedy that could easily have been prevented, as the women had created a union to protest the long hours and poor working conditions, and had even gone on strike shortly before the tragedy had taken place. This massive loss of life is the largest industrial disaster in New York City's history, and it created a national outrage, which led to the creation of worker safety and wage laws, many of which are still in practice today. Now, if you hadn't heard about this disaster before, don't be surprised. I hadn't either, and that surprised me, especially because it occurred so close to where I go to school every day. I was listening to my usual podcast on my daily commute and I heard about the fire. I was immediately intrigued and I had the opportunity to research it with two amazing classmates, Akshant and Yash, during our motion capture class. When our project was over, I still wanted to further research the disaster, and my professor showed me Chalk, a project by Ruth Sergel, where on the anniversary of the Triangle Fire, volunteers go to the homes of the victims and create a chalk memorial outside on the sidewalk. I was interested in engaging with the stories of the women, and I wanted to do it more permanently because this chalk is kind of ephemeral. And so I decided to make the Triangle Fire the focus of my thesis project. Augmented Remembrance, Women of the Triangle Fire, encourages users to engage with the stories of the women who lost their lives in this tragedy while experiencing the city of New York and its history in new and different ways. It's a mobile application which uses augmented reality at the homes of the victims to tell their stories. When a user scans a target, they're presented with an image of the victim where possible and an audio story about that woman. Because photos were very expensive in 1911, many of these women were never photographed, and so a historical photo is sometimes used instead. By focusing on an auditory experience instead of a purely visual medium, users can more directly interact with the untold stories in the environment where these young women lived and give insight into the importance of this tragedy and the effects it has on people today. Originally, this project was set to launch on March 25th of this year, the anniversary of the fire. But unfortunately, because of the global pandemic, I was not able to complete my pilot. However, I was able to hold a digital memorial to share some of the stories of the women and honor them on the day. In the future, I'd like to expand Augmented Remembrance to other cities and tell other stories as a larger platform. In the future, I'd like to expand Augmented Remembrance to add more different histories and different cities to allow people to experience the history of their city while living in it. Thank you so much. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my thesis advisors, Jess and Danielle, who supported me both academically and in life. Anthony Dean for encouraging me to pursue this project and mentoring me way after I took all his classes. Jonathan Belen for encouraging me to think about the victims instead of the tragedy itself, and my awesome mocap teammates Akshant and Yash, who started this research with me. I'd also like to thank Sven Travis for encouraging me to get crazy with this. Also, my wonderful family, especially my little sister Laura, who's completing her own master's at this time, and my wonderful friends, especially Gia, Janae, and Belle, for keeping me sane through these last 2 years. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And next, we'll move on to Brandy, an MFA student.
Hello, everyone. Are you hearing an echo, first of all? Someone please comment. Hello, everyone. Please comment if you're hearing an echo. Okay, no echo. Great. So once again, hello everyone. My name is Brandy Kennard. First and foremost, I want to give a shout out to my mama. Yes, I said it, my mama. Hi. And I want to thank all of you for being here and hanging out on this talk to the very end. I really appreciate it. I'm sure some of y'all can relate with me. I'm having a mental breakdown from political PTSD. And apparently, since coronavirus has caused many jurisdictions to limit face-to-face interactions to the only most essential, unfortunately, political PTSD, along with other health emergencies, such as getting stuck in the washer machine while playing at home, hide and go seek, getting poisoned by drinking household cleaning products, cavities, and root canals, cannot be treated at this time because they are not considered essential. But that doesn't help the fact that I'm stuck at home with the news on 24/7 and I have political PTSD. And that is because I am super frustrated with the current state of political discourse in the United States. The current state of American politics is careening off the rails. Meanwhile, a majority of the population has become meekly complacent with it. This is driving me absolutely nuts. So I decided to self-medicate with art therapy. As an artist, I think it is a perfect time to use art to be outspoken about the issues that have happened during this age of COVID-19 and the years leading up to it. Consequently, I've accomplished this by producing political satire. Because why not? Believe it or not, comedy is a great tool for reframing and changing the perspective on issues in a way that makes stress and anxieties melt away. Saturday Night Live is a perfect example of this. And admittedly, I've created toys, and I've actually recasted them. The toys that I'm talking about are classic Americana toys, and I've recasted them in obscure ways to achieve this effect and to articulate my concept. And you're probably wondering why I chose toys. Well, you're in good luck because I'm going to explain to you why. This is because I am fascinated with the ability that toys can have to replicate the larger culture symbolically. And I'm also fascinated with the dark side of play. Let's be real, we've all seen a violent, racist, or sexist toy before. These kinds of toys have imparted undesirable values on children for centuries. And those children have grown into adults who act like little kids and who also act out these undesirable behaviors. So I picked out a few retro toys that relate to controversial topics in American politics and just made their material culture a bit more obvious to parody. I also put these 3D jokes into their own environment by creating a store called Toys for Us. Get it? The US represents you and I. Okay, there goes my comedy career. But to be Captain Obvious, as you already know, due to social distancing, the plans for this thesis show has been changed drastically. So I pivoted my project to go virtual with a disheveled charm. Zoom is, I pitched it on Zoom, and it's a mock infomercial, or what I like to call a Zoom commercial. So do you get that joke at least? Okay, too cheesy. I'll stop the dad jokes. You can view this Zoom commercial in full length on the Hindsight Thesis website under the Articulating Ourselves category. But before I go, I would love to share with you the trailer. Please bear with me a couple of seconds, for I'm trying to get it off my computer now. And enjoy this background of Barbie. Like, I've always wanted to be a Barbie. Psych. All right, enjoy. All right, enjoy. I hear some echo, but anyway, you can view the whole thing on the website. And thank you for your time. I would like to also thank again my mama, because she's the one who birthed me and gave me this clever mind. And I also want to thank my thesis instructor, Catherine Warawaki, and all the other faculty who've been there and my DT friends.
Amazing. Thank you so much for
Been there and my DT friends.
Do I hear an echo? Am I hallucinating? Okay, I am hallucinating. So
Amazing. Thank you so much for been there my DT friends.
Does everything echo? Is it gone? Is it gone? Are we good? Cool, we're good. Okay. And now finally, I'd like to introduce Fifi, an MFA student.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Fifi. I'm a visual designer, singer, and music producer. So first of all, I would like to share a poem with you by Edgar Allan Poe. It's called A Dream Within a Dream. In a night or in a day, in a vision or in none, all that we see or sing is but a dream within a dream. So this is a really inspiring poem for me, and I wrote a lot of songs about this interesting topic. And Butterfly is one of them. So Butterfly is a music video seen through machine hallucination based on a song that I wrote, sang, and produced. Entering the new era of artificial intelligence, the creativity of AI will be a tremendous impact on human creativity. It makes me wonder, how will machines see us? What will they dream of? Is it a dream within a dream? And why is it relevant to our life now? So for me, it all came from the fear for the eye. The computer we're facing every day is also gazing back at us all the time. It has all kinds of data of ours. What if one day it begins to have its own consciousness and become the god to create our duplicates? So the title Butterfly actually came from a well-known story from China called Zhongzhou Dreams of a Butterfly. So the philosopher Zhongzhou one day had a dream. In his dream, he became a butterfly. And the dream was so real that when he woke up, he started to question the very being of his own, whether the reality is Zhongzhou dreaming of being a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming of being Zhongzhou the human. And of course, it also resonated with a lot of theories in the West, like Brain of Bats, a lot of sci-fi classics all discuss about the illusion of being provided by stimulated electronical impulse. And other than that, I'm deeply inspired by a lot of music videos we deeply loved, with beautiful gamification elements and mesmerizing visuals. So talk about the tools I used to create this video. I used Ableton Live to produce my music at first, and a lot of Touch Designer to create the shaders, to imitate the eye, and to demonstrate the machine hallucination that I imagine. And also a little touch of machine learning. I use a lot of data of my own selfie and run through runway machine learning to generate some visuals of my own. And also a lot of quarantine footage at home. And finally, I mix it up together in After Effects. So now let's take a look at the music video.
This
So last but not least, I want to say thank you to my thesis advisor who has guided me through. I want to say thank you to Kyle, to Jessica, to Colleen and Andrew, and also all my friends in DT who was with me through these 2 years. And for more of my work, my future music, you can visit these sites. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was such a vibe. And now I'd like to move on to the Q&A portion of our event, and which will be moderated by Nicole He. So Nicole is a programmer and artist based in Brooklyn, New York. Nicole is currently making video games, including an upcoming sci-fi voice-controlled game with the National Film Board of Canada. Super epic.
Hello, can you see me? Can you hear me? Okay, great. Well, hi everybody. Thank you so much for sharing these incredible projects, and congratulations to all the students who just presented. That was amazing, and I'm extremely impressed with all of these projects and the ways that you guys have adapted in this time and still have made incredible work. So congrats on that. So I am going to go through and ask each of you one question, and then after that, we'll see if we have time for more questions from the chat or just in general. So I think I'll just go through in order, starting with Mariah. So Mariah, super cool idea for a web series. I think it's really interesting to come at it with the perspective of showing therapy depicted in a new way. Also, I love that centipede, if that's Mariah. Oh no, that's Dahi, cool. So my question is that, you showed some of the ways that your piece could be adapted into something that's like audio only or something, or like, with other alternative ways to film it. But I was wondering if you would consider at all changing, I'm not saying you should, but I'm wondering if you would consider changing the premise in such a way that it was more like a Zoom therapy type of thing. I was thinking about the movie Searching, starring John Cho. I don't know if you've seen it, but like a lot of it, and I'm sure a lot of productions are doing this now, but the idea is like more like filming the like interfaces, like people in video chats or text messages and things like that. So I was just wondering if you had considered doing that type of thing.
Yeah. So kind of right when, we were all finding out about, I think there's two of me. Am I echoey? No. Okay, cool. Yeah, right when we were finding out, I was kind of battling with like, everyone didn't really know how long the pandemic was going to go. So it was like at first holding on to, okay, well, maybe if things are better in a month, we could just go forward as planned. But now that, it's pretty clear this has kind of really disrupted society. There's this great method that has been kind of created that I've actually done myself on another project, where you can actually direct actors through Zoom. And so I've experienced that kind of in the last couple months and figured that process out myself. And so, so definitely for moving this forward, given that, we're living in this new world where you can't really have people together. And then also the idea of like how you can utilize two people who aren't in the same room, but make it feel like we're in this intimate setting with the two people and that, they're the only ones around. So I'm definitely exploring ways to adapt it to basically be shot in a format where it's taking place over Zoom and the two characters are like separated and discussing things that way, but making sure that it still has that authenticity and that feeling of intimacy between two people.
Very cool. Yeah, I feel like everyone's doing Zoom or therapy through Zoom anyways these days, so
yeah,
it's not that much of a stretch. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so moving on to Carolina. I really love this idea of putting yourself in the shoes of a plant, and I also really love how you presented the poetry written by those plants. It's particularly interesting to me personally because I also have a sort of like time-lapse technology plant project. So very relevant to me. So my question for you is, what is your sort of ideal, maybe very speculative goal of, humans having a better understanding of plants? Is it more of like just having this philosophical understanding, or do you imagine a future where the relationship between humans and plants is different from the one that we have now?
Thank you so much for that question. Also, I love hearing that you have worked at somewhere. I would love to see it. So I think the reason why, obviously plants are very important organisms, but they're also one of the most distant from us, right? We usually tend to identify better with certain animals. And even then, there's certain animals that feel very far away. And then plants are like at the opposite extreme of something that we could possibly like identify with. So I think my ultimate goal would be, if we can think about how to relate to something that feels so far away, it's a good way to start thinking about everything else that's in between, and just taking into consideration all of the flora and fauna and valuing it for what it is, right? So we tend to think of ourselves as these superior beings over every other living form on Earth. And I think this is just a new way to start thinking about how we fit in with everything else that's alive. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, cool, thank you. Okay, moving on to Zena. So yeah, I was having all these emotions watching your presentation because I too miss the subway now. It's weird how like we complain about it all the time, and then now that it's gone, it's really sad that we're not on it. And your piece reminds me of, I mean, maybe you probably know this, the Jane Cardiff piece, Her Long Black Hair, which is like an audio experience that you listen to as you walk through Central Park. And I think the thing that's very cool about that, which I think would also be true for your project, is just like the way that you can hear the audio experience, but you also hear the sounds of the place you're in, the subway. So my question for you is, I'm just curious what your thoughts are about the ways in which the subway is both very solo and very communal at the same time. Like, I feel like your app sort of manages to capture that tension and bring it together. So just curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, actually, so the Janet Cardiff piece was one of my biggest inspirations for this project. I loved it, and it was actually really fed into the way that I designed the audios for my final pieces. But another like initial motivator for why I came up with this project was I actually was looking at the people of the subway as a community. And like I dissected it in the way that's like you kind of like have this transient community when you're just on a platform, and then you kind of enter the car and you're a part of this community within like the little car that you're in. And it started off, honestly, like my initial iterations on the project really began by just trying to look at ways that I could get people to look up and realize that they're part of this community. Realize that they actually might know some of these people if they were just to look up every once in a while. And I tried a bunch of different iterations. I went from like creating, like going all out with tactical urbanism, getting people to like record things on a postcard and mailing it back to me and stuff. But then I noticed that everybody kind of shuts themselves off with their earphones. And so that kind of gave me a way in to kind of like leverage that technology that actually usually gets people to be really like reclusive and alone and shut down in this space, and kind of bring them back into the context using their earphones or headphones. So yeah, that's exactly what kind of inspired my project.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, next up is Janae. So I really love the idea to use games to spotlight historical events and the people that were overlooked I think that's really awesome. Like, you know, and especially sort of retooling a very familiar game is, I think, effective too. Like, everybody remembers like Park Place or Boardwalk or whatever from Monopoly. So I think it's really smart to bring the places of Harlem in the Harlem Renaissance into your game. So my question is, well, so, you know, obviously your project is like subverts the original Monopoly. But I'm also curious, like, you know, I think one of the big critiques of Monopoly is that it's sort of a celebration of like ultra capitalism, right? Because your goal is to just make as much money as possible. So because your game subverts the original Monopoly, I'm curious to hear if you also think it subverts that element of the original game.
I don't think it does.
That's fine. It doesn't have to.
Because even when like in my original playtest, the goal was to make enough money to attend a rent party, like the Lily Walker rent party. And in this version, it is now just like have more money than your other competitors. And while I think that also is accurate to the time, because yes, there were rent parties and that was a form of community. But when people started to see that, wow, these parties are really profitable, they ended up becoming competition. So I think that there is a you don't become like ultra monopolist, own the whole board, like you rent everything, but there's also that there is also that like competitiveness to stay in the neighborhood and have enough money to stay in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I think I would say that, like, I think there is probably something subversive just based on who you are in the game, right? Is different. If you're a person in the Harlem Renaissance, like, is different from whatever imagining of Monopoly originally is, and I think that makes it different in terms of like what it means to be trying to make money. That's just my interpretation. But yeah, thank you. All right. Next up is Kat. So I think it's really beautiful to, you know, create a memorial for these victims from a long time ago, and you know, it's also feels really relevant because that event, as you said, led to a lot of changes in terms of worker protections, which feels important these days. So my question is mostly just like, what is the augmented experience actually look like? And what is it about the AR that improves the experience over a different type of thing, like a website or just a purely audio thing?
Right, yeah. So I thought about the use of AR a lot in this, and I thought even about substituting maybe QR codes or something that are a little bit more accessible. But I really wanted people not to be looking at their phones and to be instead experiencing the space where these women lived around them. And so I thought, especially with the new advance of the Apple AR kit, like this would be much more accessible with just your camera without having a native app. And so I decided that I wanted to just show a photo, but the experience to be purely audio so that people don't look at their phone. They see the photo for a second, but it's about a 2-minute clip. And so they are more incentivized to actually experience the space where this woman lived and like her essence, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea of it actually focusing sort of more on the environment when the AR isn't extremely complicated visually. That's cool. Thank you. Okay, so now we have Brandy. So I really love the trailer and the idea for a mock infomercial, and you know, your point that toys replicate the like larger cultural values is super interesting. And so I'm curious about what you think about the relationship between marketing and toys, like commercials and toys. And I was also, I was also just curious if you have thoughts about the ways in which like the commercials that are currently happening these days are all really are all the same and all really weird. I guess just to me, it feels like there's something very intertwined about general marketing and commercials and toys.
Oh, can you see me? All right. Well, let me turn off this. All right. So you were asking me about what do I think about contemporary commercials in regards to the toys and what are my feelings towards them? Okay, I really think, just to put it short, is that these commercials are the same. It's just like a theatrical play. It's the same play, but different characters and slightly different outfits. So that's how I feel about that. Nothing has changed. And I really want to express through this project that nothing has changed and do it in a more bite-sized, more consuming way through like comedy and also putting it in like some type of TV infomercial format. I think a lot of the people who create these toys may not at the top of their head have the intentions of putting these undesirable things within them, but it's already baked in our culture and it's like something we can almost not remove ourselves from, but we can start doing it by acknowledging that these toys are kind of damaging to young people and also to the adults who've experienced them in their childhood. So could I just mention one more thing that I didn't get to say in the talk? I wanted to say that the time period that I chose was the baby boomer toy boom. And I wanted to actually target people from like the baby boomer age group. And this period has been expressed time after time by Trump nostalgists as the time when America was great, which is very comical within that statement. And such nostalgia also idealizes the play of that era and also the play of this era as being innocent and ignoring like the sexism, violence, racism, and a whole bunch of other dangers inspired generations to actually do what they're doing now in the political system. And so that's what I wanted to shed a light on. And hopefully I did insult some people. That was my goal as well.
Thank you. Very cool. All right, so last but not least is Fifi. So first of all, like beautiful video and songs that's amazing. Yeah, everyone was vibing. That was awesome. So I'm curious, like, do you consider your video a collaboration with the machine? Do you think it's like an interpretation of what the machine actually sees, or is it more like what we ask the machine to show us? I guess I'm asking just because I feel like with a lot of sort of AI or machine learning projects where we talk about, oh, the machine thinks this and the machine thinks or feels that or dreams, I think a lot of times that we're not acknowledging all the work that the humans put into making the machines do so. I mean, obviously you did all the work as the human in this relationship. So I'm curious if you think what you think about that relationship between you as a person and the machine as the dreamer.
Thank you, Nicole. I think that's a really great question. And I think retrospectively, if I can do something to make it better, I would think currently there's very little part of it in the visual is generated by a machine, a little bit of machine learning thing by using my selfie. But I think to really convey this idea clearly, I actually tried, and also maybe I would try it in the future, that to incorporate like AI generated music in my music production. And actually there's a lot of tools that we can use today help us writing melodies, writing beats in the making process. So that's something that I might try in the future. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just want to say thank you all again to everyone who presented. Yeah, it was a privilege to get to see your projects, and yeah, big congratulations all around. You did a great job.
Amazing. Thank you, Nicole, for moderating, and thank you to all of our awesome students. All y'all's work was so amazing. And thank you so much. And now I'd like to turn it over to John for a couple just closing remarks. And also, don't forget, after this, please stay here for an after party. It's going to be lit. We're going to play Fifi's music. It's going to be great.
I've brought a special guest this evening who just who just turned my camera off. I think he's a little camera shy. But this is Poppy, everyone. He wanted to wish you all a happy graduation and completion of festival. I'm going to put him down now. Say bye, Pop. You got a little camera shy there. Thank you all for asking me to bring a close to this pretty amazing 3-day event. You know, I think some of you heard me say this, but on my calendar, today is March 75th. I feel like we never quite escaped from March. I can still think back to that last day. I was up on D12, March 9th, I think it was. I don't know. And I can remember thinking, oh man, how are we going to make this transition? How are we going to make this pivot to online? And how are all the students going to do with their thesis projects they've been invested in for months and months and months at this point? Suddenly, they no longer have access to campus, to the making center, to the labs, to each other in our spaces. And I got to say, I was worried. I was concerned for y'all. And to see the work you produced over the last 3-4 months, it's just mind-blowing. I'm so proud of everything everybody got done, such amazing projects. As program director, I don't really get to see much of the work that's going on, particularly in the spring when I'm not teaching. And so I'm a little bit disconnected from everything that's going on in the classrooms. And so the year-end events are always the place where I get to get re-energized and see what everybody's been doing. And it's just been phenomenal looking at the site and tuning in for everybody's talks over the last 3 nights. It's just exceptional. So I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. I want to congratulate everybody that's graduated. I want to thank all of the discussants and moderators who joined us to make it a successful event. Cheers, y'all. To continue my Prosecco theme, I've got a wonderful Aperol Spritz tonight. So thank you, everyone. Congrats, grads of BFADT and MFADT. Please, please, please keep in touch. Please come back and visit us. And thus concludes my remarks. Thank you all.
Amazing. Okay, well, that's a wrap. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming. Thank you for everyone that helped put together the live streaming team and the web team and the promo team and just everybody that was involved. And congrats, class 2020. And we can all just kind of chill now. So that's a wrap. Thank you so much for joining us. Oh my God, Poppy! Sorry, I'm very loud. Ah!
Woohoo! Dahi, you did a great job tonight.
Yes. Yes.
Everyone did a great job. Oh my God, the projects were awesome.